Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of the Global Cannabis Network Collective's Worldview podcast. I'm your host, Chris Day. Thanks so much for joining us again. And I've got a great guest for you this week. But before I introduce her, I want to make sure I thank the sponsors that are always there with us and help make this all possible. A shout out this week in particular to Bovida, one of our ongoing multi-year supporters for the GCNC worldview and our events around the world. Without them and others, we just would be up a creek without a paddle. And so thank you to Bovida for helping support the GCNC Worldview podcast. And for those of you who are tracking this on a regular basis, you know I've sort of been hopping around lately. Did a couple of episodes early in the season from Mexico, but back in the United States. And appropriately for this particular conversation this week, I'm back down in New Orleans, Louisiana, taking a look at movements here and what's going on. And so I want to welcome Chanda Macias. Dr. Chanda Macias, I got to get the title in. This is what happens when you're friends with the guests. You'd forget to leave the titles. But Chanda, thanks so much for joining us. You know, I don't even know where to start on how many different things you're working in, different companies and all that. So why don't you introduce yourself a little bit and tell us about where you're working at the moment and what you're working on.
Chris, it's just a pleasure to be here, first of all. I mean, you have been so strong and pivotal in this space for years and years. And I think like when I first met you back in, I hate to date ourselves over a decade ago.
Been
We
a
were a
little
little bit
while.
younger.
Yeah.
We were just so excited about where cannabis was going to lead us. And, 10 years later, we're like, wow, are we really international now? And that's the answer. Yes, we are. We are international now and learning so much about this global supply chain that I am just, overwhelmed with one, the education, two, the patient base is just amazing. We saw it here in the United States, how patients were impacted by the medicine. So when I think about my introduction, it really goes back to that one patient that made a difference in my life when I saw a better quality of life. And since then, we've seen at National Holistic Healing Center in Washington, D.C., the flagship operation, hundreds of thousands of patients. Yeah. And it's been amazing. I mean, 10 years, what can you say? And with that, not only have I seen a difference in patients' lives, because after studying cancer for over 10 years, I understood fundamentally how cannabis can work scientifically on the endocannabinoid system, but also how it can work on overall health and wellness. And it was natural for me to expand more into formulations as a research scientist, to start looking at other diseases and disease states. But there's the flip side of my introduction, which is I have an MBA in supply chain management and operational analysis. So for me to be able to actually run a business that is in healthcare has been so pivotal in touching every aspect of it. So even though I started out as a retailer, very quickly, I pivoted in different states with growing and manufacturing and just managing the whole vertical. So it's been really, really interesting to see this happening in front of my eyes in real time, especially how regulations change and how the landscapes of legislation changes and how you have to change with it.
Yeah. And just to sort of flesh out a little bit more the different operations, I mean, you mentioned you have the centers in DC and Maryland, and then your cultivations in Louisiana, I think, correct?
And West Virginia, New Jersey, and now in Germany.
Yeah. So congratulations on that. I think
I
you were
am.
there fairly recently.
Yes, I believe it or not, I'm a military brat. And so for me, going to Germany was natural. I spent 5 years of elementary school in Frankfurt. And so my sister went to college out there at Schwäbisch Gmünd. My brother was born there. And I just happened to be one of these hybrid people that live a little bit of everywhere throughout my life. And but very excited with the newest venture. I mean, culturally it's been amazing, just to be able to experience more history. That historical preference period has been amazing, but I think what's really touched me is that the same vibration or frequency I get here in the United States is that I get over there, which cannabis is needed as a medicine. And when I have been there the last, 3 years, trying to figure out the platform, and I thank you for that.
I'm
I
glad we got you over there.
I was just, so overwhelmed with the need. And I can't help being empathetic like I am and wanting to do more. And so that's where really this, passion sparked up again and said, let's go for it in a country that speaks a different language as I do. I know very, very little German. I didn't retain a lot. But I do know good energy, good people, and good business.
Yep.
So those are my
And
driving forces.
you've been able to set up a company over there and bring in staff. And I think something that I've always found, and that I won't say this is unique to US operations, but it certainly is a trend. A lot of times American operators go places and they feel like they've just got to do it their way all the time. And instead, I found the most successful operators are the ones who collaborate, right? You come in, you obviously have a lot of skills and knowledge and experience, but so do people in all of these different markets all around the world all the time. And so it's like fusing those teams together is really what makes success happen. Um, I think we're all, I have to ask the expected question about Germany because it just happened. And by the time this airs, it'll be a few more weeks out. But there was a shift in Germany, and they moved a law forward. Bit of a stair step to me, I think. But I was wondering what your impression was of the new framework that Germany has introduced, and whether or not you see this as a good thing, a neutral thing, a bad thing? Like, where's your head at with it being an operator there now?
Chris, think that's a great question. I think that legalization was wonderful. It was a wonderful step. It's a sign to go in the right direction. I like, though, incremental change. I think that making changes that are specific to the country, to the location, to the needs is very important so you don't miss that. We saw how legalization in Canada tanked the whole community. It just, so many operators, and not necessarily the big MSOs or the big companies, but the little companies that wanted an opportunity to make some money in this industry just weren't able to, and really lost a lot of their own personal wealth. And it was because how the rollout occurred. And I think, taking small incremental steps in the right direction is definitely the way to go. Instead of dealing with the aftermath of just, letting things happen. And what people don't understand also compared to the US is that racism is not necessarily a thing there. It's, speaking from personal preference, I can't generalize. There are racist tendencies, but the difference is that it's not deep rooted into the emerging of the whole society. It's more of an aftermath of people's, just seeing depictions of minorities in a negative view. So there is still an open welcoming there of everyone to participate in the industry. And it is a totally different landscape when you think about incremental change. So we don't have to think about, the whole, justice reform aspect, social equity. You don't have to even, that's not an issue there. There also, what's important is that women are highly respected. They're like world leaders in Europe. It's just amazing. I went there and looking at, yes, I'm still the CEO of Women Grow, and we fight for our rights here, whether it's in the cannabis space, but just for our reproductive rights, our basic rights as humans. And there, women are highly regarded and they're respected as business women and entrepreneurs. And that was the other difference where I felt that it was so welcoming to our community. So the difference is that they're taking their time. But what I really like about this is that they gave the power to the people. And how did they do that? Well, they let patients grow their own medicine. And I think that is very powerful. I consider that universal healthcare. I
Yeah.
mean, you have the option, if you can't obtain it or you can't afford it, that you could actually grow it yourself. And I appreciate that. And I think that that's where they got it right. I think that there's so much more they can go with, but I think taking very slow incremental steps to the future is definitely the way to go.
Yeah, a couple of things on that. One, I also appreciate the fact that they're allowing home grow. I do think that it's a little delusional to think that these lounge kind of concepts that, I mean, the clubs concept is gonna work. It never does, at least not for the long term, right? But to your point, it's incrementalism, and I have told people it is a step in the right direction. And to your comments on sort of social equity and women in business, you and I have worked together quite a bit with in your role at Women Grow here, and on the GCNC side, when Jill and I co-founded it, we wanted to make sure that at the heart of the organization was this notion that everybody should get an opportunity to participate if they wanted to, and in ways that made sense, and that it never had anything to do with people's roots or genders or beliefs, right? And so we've always wanted to be very welcoming, and I have seen immensely powerful movement with women in cannabis in Europe. There's always going to be issues. It's never perfect, but it's been nice to see a much more equitable discussion, I guess, is the proper way to say my observations have been. And I think if Jill gave up co-hosting podcasts with me, but I think she would agree with me that the movements we've seen there are much stronger. She's actually going to be representing GCNC this year at a lot of the European shows, since I did that tour last year. And a lot of the reason is because we've got so many partners now that are female-led companies that do well there, and we like to balance that out as well, since we can't be all places all the time, both of us. But it is great to see.
And Jill's also on the advisory board for Her Power.
Empower Her, yes.
Empower Her. Thank you.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I mean, I love that. I completely love it. I love when women come together to push their mission, to let people know we're here, we need each other, and how can we do good business? And I think that is a very powerful message, period, throughout our community. So, but I'll send her my regards and love and mwah, mwah, mwah,
We'll
and
pass them along.
doing
And
wonderful things.
I assume you're going to be at. Will you be at ICBC in Berlin this year?
I cannot. I am
Oh, okay.
doing an international panel at Benzinga this
That's
year.
right. That's right.
Yes, and so we're going to talk about the European marketplace. We're putting together a very strong panel because we just think it's a perfect opportunity. While the US kind of wanes here in this like limbo, maybe we'll reschedule, maybe we'll deschedule, maybe we'll get safer banking, maybe Biden will do something, maybe Trump will. We don't know. I mean, we're just
Yeah.
kind of stuck, and I'm like, are you going to change tax laws because they don't make sense? I mean, literally with the 280E, you can make $1 billion and still owe the IRS $1 billion. Like, there's
Yep.
no way anyone's going to make money, period, but owe the federal government everything until the 280E is changed. And I think more operators are starting to see that the law does not make sense for them, but they're owing millions and millions of dollars to the government, which doesn't make sense. So
Yep.
there's no way to make money in cannabis here right now. Unfortunately, if you're a grower, you can take more deductions, but still you're kind of landlocked. Where in
Yeah.
Europe, there's no such thing as the 280E.
Right. And I think one of the little nuances to the new German legislation that I like, right, is that it drops cannabis from the list of narcotics in Germany. And that's a huge move. It's something that while people are talking about home grow and they're talking about social clubs and then all of that, they sort of miss that piece because that's a requirement to empower the law, and it keeps them more or less aligned with international treaties and such the way they've structured this. But it just further highlights how far behind um, the U.S. is, and I think it's why more people are looking outside the U.S. domestic borders for opportunities. I mean, it's why we're doing this program in Lima, Peru, in October, because we're trying to show what opportunities exist in South America, why we talk to people in Australia, why we're looking in Europe. Um, but Chanda, you started thinking about this pivot several years ago, and so we'll just say that's a bit ahead of the curve from where the market was. Um, but what do you think the impetus and the challenges are for a company here or an investment group in North America that's looking to actually shift and create a more international profile? Because you've now done it, but what are those challenges and sort of mental gymnastics people need to deal with?
It's so interesting, Chris, that you say that. I think like if I wasn't a military brat and had to go to country and adapt to cultural ways and language and verbal and nonverbal communication, I wouldn't know, I would feel out of sorts going into the international market. The first thing that happens is there is a language barrier. And the nonverbal communication is, it's very awkward. And so for me, even being raised in Germany over that period of time, we didn't show a lot of emotion, and I'm this smiley little person every day, but they don't show much emotion. They're very stoic, very straightforward, and there's no really, it's a different sense of humor. It's It's like night and day. So when you go over to a foreign country to do business, you have to learn how to adapt to their ways. And as Americans, we get such a bad rap in the international market because we want them to adapt to us. And they're like, no, you will adapt to us or we'll break you. So that's the first.
Especially in cannabis, by the way, because we got no legs to stand on, folks. So
They look at cannabis even differently. Cannabis in, Europe is totally different from our perception of it here in the US. We look at it as, I look at it as a medicine that should be utilized by those that have different ailments and conditions. It's very mild, but it has significant impacts on health. On the difference there is that they look at it as a true narcotic. That's why it was actually classified as that. And it's not really an underground drug that is sold common there. It's not a part of the recreational drug market. And so it's really looked at as a hardcore drug in comparison to what we would look at like for cocaine, for example. And I'm talking frank because this is the difference in the marketplace. So their education level in Europe has to be brought down from here all the way to here and understand that there is a medical impetus behind cannabis where they have not been educated on it. They don't understand that. They don't know how to perceive it from the American point of view. All their ideas about cannabis is on these, TV shows with drug lords. It's not an education on the medicine. So that is the second thing that we need to understand when entering a new market is to understand the landscape of it and where it sits in its society. And
yeah,
with
and
us,
I'm gonna caveat something real quick. We're speaking in generalities here, based on like cultural norms. There are some very well educated people driving the conversation in
yes.
Europe, and there's some great operators and there's thoughtfulness being put in. But at a general sort of cultural level, depending on which country you're in Europe and such, I agree with you. I just want to make sure that as listeners listen in, we're not saying this is a blanket statement. It's sort of cultural trends and such, right?
You hit another point, which is it's also specific from country to country because different countries have different perceptions of it as well based upon their history, their culture. It's like the supply chain in Europe. It's like,
Yep.
I mean, you might go to Portugal to Germany, or you might go to Canada, Portugal to Germany, or you might go to Austria, Australia to, Portugal, but Portugal seems to be pretty good.
Right.
And then,
Certainly.
but there's South Africa, there's Malta, there's all these different supply chains all impacting, and it's based upon what they know about cannabis, how they know how to grow, how they know how to produce products. And that information is still pretty limited over there. So it's a huge opportunity in that state for US companies to go in there because we have all the technology in the world to be successful in a European or international market. We have automation now. We have when I think about technology, when I first started 10 years ago, to pre-roll and sell it, you're literally like stuffing a pre-roll. Now
Yep.
you grind it up and put in a machine grinds it up and makes like thousands of them in like minutes. We didn't
Yep.
have that. Like that just shows you how much the marketplace has changed. And Europe has access to go like completely automated with a robust supply chain overnight based upon the understandings of the US market. So that's a benefit for us to think about the international, workforce and the international playground of the cannabis industry.
Yep. Yeah, I love it. And I do hope that more companies take sort of this global view where, we can use the advantages that each market has to help expand the discussion, expand the ecosystem overall, and, do it in ways that are equitable and responsible and profitable, for all the participants. It's been really good to see, and I could sit and chat with you about all of this for hours, but it's a podcast, and so I have to stay true to time. But I always like to ask, sort of as I'm closing it out, the crystal ball question, right? Which is, where do you see in the next couple of years the biggest movements and the biggest opportunities, throughout the network of companies you're building? Like, where are your eyes set for the next couple of years? Because you've been doing pretty good at predicting market movements and opportunity spaces.
I tell you, it's been a labor of love, though. Pioneering is always a hard thing. But if I had the crystal ball, and I see this coming it's coming steadily, but international brands are going to emerge in this industry, and they're going to be world dominators, just like our Nikes, like our Adidas. I mean, I'm just throwing off the brands that are international, that penetrate every marketplace. So if you're able to really focus on that opportunity, I think you are gonna bank on a lot. The problem with those opportunities is that usually some of the foundation work in building those brands globally is where we see the cracks in the foundation, the pressure that comes with it, the investors, the operators, the community. There's so many people you have to answer to in building a brand, especially globally, that it gets very difficult to focus just on the business of building the brand and not the focus of building or communicating every step with your stakeholders. And it slowed down a lot of great companies that I thought had really good opportunities to be able to do something amazing. But because of all the inward fighting and implosion, it's just killing them from being able to make it what it should be. So empathy for those companies that are out there that are experiencing this, and staying lean and mean and building those brands are going to be important for the future, because then your stakeholders might not be able to hold you back.
Yeah, it's I can appreciate that, and I agree. I mean, we're always out there pushing the notion of collaboration, trying to act from a point of higher ground. That not everybody and everything is going to go your way every day, but sort of that power of positive momentum and, finding the right people to work with and collaborate with will make the difference. So in 1999, we didn't know who the big sort of internet and global tech companies were going to be. The ones that became dominant were hardly blips on the screen. I feel like we're in a similar spot with the cannabis industry. Like, the true future players of this space probably exist today, but they are not the large players, for the most part. They are not going to be the folks we see as large players today. I don't think.
No, you hit it. I always say this, and this will date me again on my age. When AOL was #1, Google was 17.
Yep.
That's what you just said.
Amazon was selling a few books once in a while, in the late 90s. So that's right. It'll be interesting to watch what happens in the cannabis space. And, when I am asked to highlight people in the industry that are doing amazing things and are stand-up people in their operations, Chanda, you're always one of those that's at the top of the list. So I really thank you so much for joining us today. It's always great to get your perspective. I'm not sure exactly where we'll cross paths again, but I know it always happens in person at least a couple times a year as we hop around the globe. So it's great to see you here, though, on the screen. And thanks so much for joining.
Thank you as well, Chris. Hi, everyone.
All right, everybody. Thanks for listening to the GCNC Worldview. If you haven't subscribed yet, I still don't know what you're waiting for. Just hit that little button down below that says subscribe, and we'll look forward to talking to you next time. Bye all.